Hi guys, I'm Matthew, your VB tutor. Welcome back to this short series, episode 4, where I'm going to go through our last couple of methods and features of our class to fetch data and update or insert data. The upsert data, this is going to be a little bit more complicated, but we'll go through it, we'll step through everything properly for you. So, let's jump back into our class database. Now, I'll just show you in here, I've just filled up our database with some dummy data. So our bookings, we have a few hundred bookings in here. Customers, none of these are real people, neither are our cars. This is just all dummy information just for the sake of populating our database. So we're going to come back in here into our class. Now, the first thing that we're going to build from here is our fetch data. So our fetch data is going to be, we're going to often need to grab a lot of data all at once, like our, say, an entire table's worth of data. So this is the method that we're going to use, or the function that we're going to use to grab that information. So down here, we'll put that under our execute queries. So we're going to call this public function fetch data. And again, we're just going to pass in an SQL query, by-val SQL query as string, and we're going to return that as a dictionary object. Dictionaries are really great because they have key value pairs. Key value pairs are basically the name of your field and the name and the data that it represents in that field. And this is just going to be really, really efficient for us to pass our data back to our application and start working with it and start using it. We'll go through how to actually do that a bit later on, but for now we'll just show you how to pull that data out and we'll get into that. So go on error, do our error handling again. Okay. So from here, we're going to use a record set object again. So we'll go set, record set equals create object. It's ADODB dot record set. We're also going to be using an integer for iterating and looping through our record set object once we get our values back. So our record set, we're going to open that with our query. Again, we're going to pass in the connection, open, and again, we only need to read the values, so we're just going to go read only. That just makes sure that nothing gets adjusted when we don't mean for it to. Next, we're going to have a dictionary object. This is going to be our dictionary that we're going to pass information back with. So create object, scripting dictionary. And then we've got a record. So each record, every time we loop through our record set data, and row index, we're just going to have that as a value as we start passing information back. So we're going to go do while, not end of file. This is going to let us loop through each of the different records in the object that we've pulled out information with. So essentially how this looks is, say we're going to query everything in the bookings table. So we're going to have, we're going to do a record set, query everything, pull out everything, and then it's going to loop through each of these items. Now, each of these items, if we put that into a single dictionary, that's not really going to work that well. So what we're going to do instead is create a new dictionary each time we're creating for each different row or each different record. So we go set record, create object, scripting dictionary, We're going to loop through the fields in that. Count -1 because it's 0 indexed, but it's counting the number of fields as a whole value. And then we're going to add the record. So our key for the record is going to be the field name. So we go fields name, and then we're going to set the value of that to there. So field I dot value. All right, and then our main dictionary object, so this one that we've created up here, we're going to add the index for that will just be the row index and our record. So essentially what we're doing is we're building a dictionary of dictionaries. And then we'd increment the row index and we'll move to the next record. So what is this actually doing? So essentially when we come through here, we create an entire dictionary which is going to hold every single record and every single bit of data from this table. So we're going to loop through each table with this RSEOF. That's going to allow us to loop through each individual record. On each record, we're going to add a new dictionary or create a new dictionary which has the booking ID is 1, the customer ID is 19, vehicle ID 7, so on and so forth. And then it's going to add that dictionary to the main dictionary with a row index. So saying row 1 is this whole bit of data. Then we move to the next one, row 2 is this whole bit of data, row 3 is this whole bit of data, and so on and so forth. So that's going to allow us to get all that information and pass that back to our application. So once we've done that, we have our fetch data object here. So we're just going to set that equal to the whole dictionary that we've been working with here. And then we're going to close the record set because we're finished working with that now, and set that to nothing to just clear it up. Exit the function so that we don't jump into the error handler unexpectedly. So that's going to grab our information. Now, what if we want to submit information to our database? So there's a couple of things to think about here. When you submit data to a database, you're going to be doing one of two things. You're either going to be adjusting this record. So the booking ID is never going to change, but maybe you're changing which vehicle they're doing, or maybe they're changing the date. So in that case, you're going to do an update query. An update query with SQL will update information, but it won't insert it. So with an insert query, if you want to add a new line down here, update won't work. So we need to do an insert query, which is going to insert a new line. Say we'll do customer ID 2, car 3, and we'll just set the dates to whatever. So that's going to be, a new booking when we're inserting that information. But what I'd like to do is I like to make it easier for myself when I'm using this. So I create something called UpsertData, basically combining the two things here. So we're inserting or upserting. So let's just start building that. So we're going to do UpsertData. We're always going to know what the table name is that we want to be sending information to. So we're going to pass that in. We also want to know what the ID field is. This is going to be the key identifier to see if this record already exists that we're trying to update or insert into the table. So ID field name as string, and then essentially the data that we're going to actually be passing to the dictionary. Sorry, to the database. Okay, so I'm just going to do our error handling. Say what the table was where there was an error, and we'll also indicate the field where there was an issue, or sorry, the ID field where there was an issue. Okay, so first we're going to need to identify our variables. So we're going to have an ID value, variant. Also going to have the SQL query itself as a string. And then we also want to check if the data that's been passed in actually has the ID field in it. So we're going to have that as a Boolean value. So has ID field as Boolean. So first we'll just check if data, so this is a dictionary object, if data in that data exists the ID field name. So this is just checking if, this is just checking if the ID field name that we've passed in actually exists in this data that we've been passed. If it doesn't exist, then we can assume that we're trying to insert data because we're not updating, we're not passing an ID to update. So has ID field equals true, and ID value equals data ID field name. Okay, and then we're going to have another Boolean value here of just exists. So this is going to check if the record exists. So Boolean, if has ID field, then SQL query is select count. So this is essentially just going to return a value that's going to be either 0 or more. So we're going to select count all from our table name where ID field name equals our ID value. Now, we might also need to format these SQL values as we're pushing it into the database. So what we might build is, and we'll come back to this. So we need another function here. So format SQL value by val value as variant as string. So we always want to pass it back as a string. So we're going to set this like so, because our SQL query is always going to be a string. So we're going to always pass it back to the SQL query as a string. So if our value is, let's say if it's empty, then we're going to return that format SQL value equals null. This will be recognized by our SQL query as an actual null value. What if our value is numeric? So if it returns, if it is a number or something like that, then we can just pass that back as a standard value. So format SQL value, start it on there, straight value. Then else if, what about if it's a date? Is date. Then we want to the way that an SQL query is going to read a date, it's encapsulated in these hash symbols, and then we're just going to format the value into a format that the SQL query will recognize. So that's going to be year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds, and then wrapped in again the hash value. What if our variable is a Boolean? Sorry, their type value equals VB Boolean. Then we're going to return a 1 or a 0, depending on whether the value is a true or false. Then finally, it's going to be, if it's not any of those other types of values, then it's just going to be a standard text value. But we need to pass it through as with single quotes, double quotes, and escaping single quote characters within the original value. So we wrap it in a single quote. We replace the value. Any single quotes it finds, it needs to escape, which is done with a double quote. And then we finalize that with a single quote. So this it might be a bit confusing. Essentially, all this is doing is formatting the value in a way that an SQL query is going to recognize. So then when we pass that ID value to the SQL query, we can always format it in a way that SQL is going to recognize. All right, so now we've built our SQL query. So our exists value, we're going to convert this to a Boolean, our result, because it's going to be either a 0 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any value above 0 is going to be a true value when converting to a Boolean. A 0 value is always going to be false. So we can execute this, and we're going to execute this as a scalar because this is going to return a single value, which is all that we want. And we'll do SQL query. And essentially what this is going to return is either does the record exist, true or false. That's all this is essentially doing. All right, so then we want to do the logic of is this an update query or is it an insert query? So let's build these out. So if it has an ID field and it exists, then this is going to be an update. We're going to be updating the record. Else we're going to be inserting the record. So building out these queries is going to be a bit tricky to do. So we might just split these off into a separate function. So I'm going to create a function for build insert query by our table name as string, and then our data as well, because we obviously need to pass that. Okay, and then we want to return that back as a string value. We've already got error handling here in our upsert data, so we don't necessarily need to be putting in some error handling here, because this is the only time that we're ever going to actually call these functions. So our variables that we're going to use, it's going to be fields as a string, values as a string, item as a variant, as we're sort of looping through each of the items in the dictionary. Oh, sorry, they're going to be keys. We're going to be looping through keys. And then we're going to do a for each loop, and we're going to do for each key in our data.keys. All right. and then we're going to go to the next item. So next key. So our fields is going to be fields, and so this is essentially going to be building out a string that's going to say what our fields are. So item, because key, because our key is going to be what the field name is, and then we're going to have a comma at the end of that, and then values, and now we're going to need to format that value as well, because we're not going to know exactly how it's coming in. So data and the key. All right, and then our fields equal, because when we get to the end of this loop, we're going to have this sort of trailing comma, which we don't really want on either of these. So the fields, length of fields, just -2. And same thing with values, like so. And then our final insert query from this is going to be BuildInsertQuery. So this is the value that we're going to be returning. So insert into table name, and then our fields are put inside a bracket like this. Space, do values, and then define the values in here. So essentially your query is going to look something like this. You're going to do insert into bookings, and then it'll be customer ID, vehicle ID, etc. And then values is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So this is how your query will eventually look when you build it with this. So now we'll build out the update query as well. So build update query. In here we'll need to pass in the table name. We'll also need, unlike the insert query, we're going to need to know what the field name, the ID field name is. So we'll pass that in as well, and then we'll obviously pass in the data as dictionary. All right, so we have the set clause, key, variant. Then we need the ID value as value, variant, and actually that should be all we need. So we'll set our ID value to the ID field name. So this is essentially our field name is going to be the key. Data is going to tell us what that value is. So for each item in data.keys, or for each key in data.keys, let's go next key. So if our key does not equal ID field name, then set clause equals our set clause and square brackets key equals, and again we want to use that FormatSQLValue method that we built just a minute ago for our data key, and then comma that. And we just get rid of that trailing comma on the end of the set clause, and then we're going to build our actual query. So it's going to look like this: update table name, close off the square bracket. I'm going to set clause. So this is the set clause that we've built here. So we're setting that where our ID field is equal to again, we want to format the SQL value of the ID value. Added in an extra. There we go. Okay, so again, this is how this will essentially look. So we'll update bookings, and we're going to set, say, our customer ID to equal, say, 5, and we'll update our vehicle ID to equal 3, where ID will be for booking ID equals 10. So that's going to be roughly what our query is going to look like when it comes out of this function. All right, so back into our upsert data, we're going to build these out. So we can now do SQL query, which is our main SQL query here. So SQL query is going to be for updating the record. So BuildUpdateQuery. The values that we're going to be passing in are our table name. We've already got that here. That's been passed to this function. Our ID field name and the data. Then we're going to do the same thing for insert the record. So BuildInsertQuery, table name. We don't need the ID field for this one. So then we just do data like so. So now we're going to have our SQL query. So now we can actually execute that. So we'll go execute query, SQL query. Simple enough. We already have this method available, which we've built here in the class. And then if that doesn't error, then things are all fine. We'll just check if it already existed. Actually, we'll go if has field ID and exists, and we'll say it's updated. If not, it's inserted. Record in table name. Okay, so that's basically just going to, if we're updating the record, then that's just going to log the message updated record in table bookings. If we're inserting the record, that's going to say inserted record in table booking. And then we can exit that subroutine. So now we have everything that we essentially need to start working on our application. We've got all the functions that we need in our database, in our class, to start actually interacting with the database in a meaningful kind of way. So in the next episode, we're going to go over actually building out this booking manager. It's going to be a very simple little tool. I'll build out the interface first, and then you can start looking at the code and understanding how we sort of interact with the database. So we'll see you in the next one. Thanks.